Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 33 years of law enforcement analysis experience. He spent time as a senior international advisor of the Jamaican government and a UK National Criminal Intelligence Service. He has a criminal intelligence certification, and he is currently the Vice President of IALEIA. Please welcome Phil Powell. Phil, how are we doing?
Good, Jason. Thank you very much for the introduction. Great to be with you and looking forward to our session.
Yeah, and obviously our thoughts are with Jamaica as they just went through that hurricane. Glad you are safe, and obviously it's a horrible event that happened there, but I'm glad we were able to get a chance to still talk today.
Yes, Jason. Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. Yeah, very difficult time for Jamaica. Personally, I was very fortunate. A lot of others less so, and it's going to take a lot of harder work and effort for the rebuild process. But Jamaican people are resilient and very strong, and I'm very confident that although it'll take time, that they'll come through this with their usual enthusiasm and vigor, and Jamaica will come again.
All right. So obviously, I do want to talk IALEIA, but I also want to get to your background story and how you got here today. So how did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Okay, well, winding the clock way back, you mentioned the 33 years directly involved in intelligence within the law enforcement environment, but I was actually working in the intelligence community prior to that. I started in the mid-80s in the UK, and really my first formal engagement and working directly with law enforcement was when I joined the National Criminal Intelligence Service in 1992. Which was basically shortly after it had been formed by the British government and was the first real national criminal intelligence entity to support law enforcement in the UK.
All right. Take us back there and just help us, like how it was, the tasks that you got into, the environment that you were in, and some of the tasks and data.
So back in the day, it was recognized that the UK law enforcement structure consisted of over 40 police forces, individual police forces. And as globalization, if you like, with any industry, but the same with crime, started to spread, borderless crime, certainly within the UK and further afield, there was a realization that there needed to be centralized coordination and analysis of information relating to criminality, because it was going from being local to being national to being international at a pace. And there were lots of crossovers going on. And there was a realization that fragmentation of information and data was not the way forward. So the National Criminal Intelligence Service was formed. It was relatively small at that time, but it drew on expertise from multiple disciplines within law enforcement, from investigative and operational individuals through to those with an intelligence or analytical specialization. Drew them all under one roof in London initially, with 6 regional offices throughout the UK. My role really was to come in and bring some of my expertise around intelligence collection and analysis that I'd learned in the intelligence environment within the United Kingdom. It was still a relatively new concept for some of the wider intelligence community to be involved in supporting law enforcement. And traditionally, intelligence services stayed in their own realm behind the fence in a very guarded environment, but there was a realization that the fight against serious and organized crime was starting to impact on a lot of wider security issues, and therefore there was this collaboration formation going on. So there was a lot more liaison, a lot more coordination of the intelligence on a broader field.
How was it breaking down those silos and having this collaboration aspect to it? Because as you mentioned, you're dealing with organized crime, and folks are used to doing things a certain way, and now you're in this kind of conglomerate of multiple various points of view coming together.
Yeah, it was a challenge. It was a challenge because there was a lot of traditional thinking within enforcement outside, and it was a real challenge to really bring particularly the analytical piece to the forefront. a lot of the analysts in the United Kingdom working in intelligence were traditionally civilians. And that was a challenging barrier at the time, back in the day, to break down that or bring together sworn officers, enforcement officers, and have them work with civilians. But NSIS provided that platform for that. And even for some of the, should we call them, non-believers at the time, after a sort of 3 to 5 year secondment to the National Criminal Intelligence from their home forces or enforcement agencies, I would like to think that the majority of those did go back to their respective units and environments, fully appreciative of the value of analysts. And so the word spread there, which was really the platform for the formation of the whole approach to intelligence-led policing in the UK, and then the creation of the National Intelligence Model.
How long were you in this position?
So I would have been working directly with NSIS right up to 2008. I'd obviously spent time in London working before I went on to a couple of secondments overseas to the United Nations before I got posted out from NSIS to an overseas position where we had various crime liaison officers in various embassies and high commissions throughout the world in key nodal areas to work with our partner agencies internationally.
As you look back, what are some of the major things you feel that you accomplished and learned at the position?
Well, I think certainly at that time, the realization of the value of that sort of wider integration of data and information into one space, recognizing those crossovers into various different operations and different investigations that were going on, I think we broke down some of those siloed barriers and realized that the criminals were certainly interacting and working on a wider network. And so therefore, law enforcement had to adapt and react accordingly. So that widespread information sharing, availability and liaison network became an absolute key factor into trying to stay one step ahead of these growing syndicates and wider international perspectives that the crime groups were working to. So I think that was one major takeaway, this globalization of crime networks. And then the second was how absolutely critical and valuable the use of analysis in those areas was in order to all sort of maximize resources that remain as they do today, infinite, not huge amounts of resources. So how best to use those resources by focused and deliberate areas of action for the decision makers to maximize those resources, but utilizing the tremendous work done by the analysts to actually point them in the right direction and help steer best approaches for those operational and investigative commanders to make the decisions.
Yeah. So this was centralized in London, but you're also stationed in Jamaica. Is that correct?
Right. So the formation of NSIS at the time was headquarters based in London, but it also had regional offices geographically located throughout the United Kingdom. And then it was also a shared international network, which was really a rollover from the previous approaches, where key areas of upstream disruption for international crime, the UK would have a network of liaison officers based overseas.
Yeah. And then how was that? Again, you're bringing everything together, you're organizing data and processes, yet I'm guessing that the issues in Jamaica are very different from those of the UK.
Yeah, of course. But one of the scenarios we had back in the early 2000s was there was a lot of international crime impacting on the UK from various different jurisdictions and entities. And then, of course, the influx of transnational narcotics trafficking, and obviously South America being a key production area for those narcotics, and Jamaica as a transshipment point because it's located in the Caribbean. And when you couple that with the large diaspora and traditional relationship between UK and Jamaica, then obviously there were a lot of cross inquiries going on between what was happening in the UK and what was happening in Jamaica. So having liaison officers in place in the Caribbean to work with their local counterparts within enforcement in those jurisdictions was, again, another example of that collaborative working to look at both aspects of the crime groups with a view to understanding the extent of the network and looking for opportunities to obviously to negate those threats and to try and bring those involved to justice.
What was behind the move in 2008?
So in 2008, my time in Jamaica had more than passed, actually, because there were some changes in the UK. I'd effectively been out there for 6 years and it was time to come back. But then there were some capacity building projects that they were looking to do. And I think because of my background and because of the time I'd actually spent in location, I was approached by various funding partners to see if I would be prepared to assist in some additional capacity building work around the same sort of intelligence analysis component within the Jamaican mechanism.
I guess we skip over, we missed the part about the Balkans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was at the end. That was I went from working at NCS HQ to this opportunity that presented itself when the UK wanted to support the UN mission in Kosovo, and we're looking for some people. And I was approached again to see if I would be happy to get involved in going out and leading the intelligence and analysis team, really, to try and do some work around there with UNMIC and the police there under a UN auspice to see what analysis could be gleaned to ensure that organised crime wasn't going to get a grip in what was then a US administrative enclave as Kosovo prior to it becoming its own standalone sort of entity further down, much further down the line.
Yeah. So this is 1999, 2000 time. 2000
yes,
time.
Indeed.
This feels like you're like a little bit of a diplomat here in this role.
Yeah. So, I say, with the 1999 came the crises that were going on throughout the Balkans, post-cons, breakup of Yugoslavia, etc. And obviously, one of the flashpoint areas amongst many was Kosovo and the well-documented situation that happened there. And then, obviously, that became, because of its situation, temporarily under the UN administration. And I've spoken previously in Washington and elsewhere about analysis in what I would call non-traditional environments. And that isn't talking about anybody's nationality or any particular country, but the fact that any area is under a UN administration makes it a sort of artificial setup, a temporary setup. And obviously trying to conduct analysis in those kind of environments, which were unstable in many ways, was a real challenge to take a team there, team working with 5 other different nationalities as well, all coming together from various enforcement entities to try and put a team together there to start to do exactly what we basically done in the UK, which is trying to have a centralized pooled resource for gathering information around criminality that would be taking place or evolving in that very artificial environment whilst Kosovo was under a UN mandate. So it was work conducted under the United Nations mission in Kosovo, UNMIC, and specifically the UN POL, basically United Nations Police, UNPOL there. So we were then under that auspice and we were basically starting with a blank sheet of paper. So very interesting, working very closely, obviously, with the military that were effectively running the security there, the UN police, which was made up of a raft of different nations that were there, and also battling with the scenarios that you had in a very difficult situation. And I always quote this when I'm teaching analysts about knowing their trade craft rather than relying on technology. At times, when we were first there, we only had 2 hours of power a day.
Wow.
So that really becomes a challenge, even though back in the day we weren't quite in the technological revolution we're in today. But obviously, you got to go back to your basics at that point when the seniors want analysis on things, and you can't really turn around and say, well, I'm sorry, I haven't got any power to plug in my laptop or my computer. You got to go with what you got. So it really was an eye opener, and it really did. The initial team that we took out there to set up structurally, it provided some really good challenges, and it really enforced to me the importance of the analysts understanding their tradecraft. I'm all for the use of technology. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but the ability to be able to do it under pressure when you don't have those tools is really important. And you could really draw full circle back and say, even though we're not quite in that situation at the moment in Jamaica, but obviously there was a period where power was down, infrastructure was damaged. If you're going to have to operate in those environments, you better know your trade craft and you better know how to do it longhand.
Yeah, well, I'm envisioning it. You only have 2 hours a day, and
Yeah,
you're obviously not relying on the computer most of the day, so
right,
you're not getting
right,
your data that way to analyze. So
right.
then you're going more of what you talked about, the old-fashioned way, as some people might say it, where you're dealing with reports, human intelligence, getting out of the desk, just
Yep,
networking and
yep.
collaborating and meeting.
Absolutely. Yes, Jason. It's a fundamental part of what the analyst needs to be doing because whilst that intelligence cycle, all those different components in the intelligence cycle from planning and direction through to collection, through to the collation evaluation, the pre-analytical stage really, it's really important that analysts understand all those different aspects of the cycle so that they can better enhance the product they generate. And I again would encourage any analyst who's obviously aware of the intelligence cycle, but actually take time to go and find out and be immersed in those other aspects of it and not be focused too directly on just their analytical part of that process. I think it's really important that you understand that and the aftermath, the dissemination and feedback side of things. So while the analyst's role is to do that core competency around analysis, it's really important if they're going to value add to their product that they understand the challenges, particularly around sometimes the collection side that are out there, because when they are tasking out for additional information, they need to understand the ability to collect and see some of the challenges they are so that what they're actually sending out and what they're producing in order for requirements to be collected are reasonable and achievable. So I think as a true rounded analytical professional, you need to be fully with each of those different disciplines within the intelligence cycle.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned the intelligence cycle,
Yeah.
and in this case, when you're dealing with such different sources of information, oh geez, I'm drawing a blank on step where I want to say collaborate, but that's not the right word.
Well, it all comes under the collection process, really.
Yeah, I would imagine with this, since you only have electric power for 2 hours a day, that the big portion of your day is collection. You're having different sources because I feel today when analysts, it's data, most of it is electronic information. It's data, right? You're not getting so many different types of sources, whether it's handwriting, meeting. I guess we are getting a little bit more into video intelligence now with street cameras, but back then, as you're dealing with only having computers 2 hours a day, your tasks are dealing obviously with more than just computer data.
Yeah, exactly. The world we live in this modern era and this technological era is obviously the data comes to you more readily than maybe back in those days. And certainly in that environment, that sort of fragmented, if you want to call it a kind of artificial environment under an administration, United Nations administration, those flows of data certainly weren't there in place. So yeah, you're reverting back to collection methodologies by have to go out and get it yourself. So because of the relatively small nature of the team, a lot of time and effort was spent on building those relationships in theatre, as well as looking at what are the various different information sources were out there. Obviously, in the UN environment like that, when you've got lots of different moving parts in the wheelhouse of theatre, be it NGOs, be it UN, be it the military, and of course all the different nationalities that are represented in that space, it becomes really important to reach out and find exactly where the information is, and also to create those protocols and MOUs for sharing of that information as well, and making sure you put it into one space. But the principles remain the same, that you have to have a central repository in order to store this data, to collate it, as you've mentioned earlier, and also to be able to evaluate it. And that's a huge challenge in this day and age, is evaluation, because there is so much data out there. With the advent of AI and all the other sources, that corroborating intelligence from independent sources now has become bigger challenge because of the breadth of information sharing that goes on in through the technical side. So yeah, we did spend a lot of time doing that. We also had to adapt our core principles of the intelligence process into what is workable in that environment. And I think one of the big lessons learned with that was the adaptability of our analysts to be able to pivot and to try and, whilst remain true to the principles and the philosophies of the intelligence cycle, find new and innovative ways to find information, get information, and draw it in. Be it deployment of field operatives, but also that liaison and collaboration aspect is really, really important. And all it is an expansion of what we all do as analysts and intelligence professionals, which is networking, which is always a big factor, and one we always push hard on about the importance of networking and access. It's key, really, because you can have the greatest set of analysts in the world, but if you don't have the mechanisms to support that or the environment to support that analytical work, it's really challenging. What I will say is, even though we have that lack of power initially, those core principles that analysts have and are ingrained through their structured analytical techniques, they stood true in that environment, and it shows that you can actually conduct analysis longhand, for want of a better term. Even though we live in a modern era, it's really important for analysts to be able to still have those core principles rather than just technical solutions to everything. And again, to your point from earlier, Jason, that the fact that there's been the recent Hurricane Melissa through Jamaica, losses of power, albeit they've been restored to a large part of where we are. Some of the other aspects of the island still remain really, really catastrophically impacted. You still got to be able to deliver critical analysis to the decision makers, whether you got power or not. So those core fundamentals that we all learn in our tradecraft early on remain true, and they can be done. You just have to be adaptable and flexible, as I know one of the key traits of analysts requires that.
So true. What did you accomplish, both you and your team?
I think what we were able to do is go in and set up a principled collection point, really, for information and provide some true analysis in a very, as I mentioned earlier, fragmented and sort of disjointed environment in challenging circumstances and with all the issues that we've talked about there, the restrictions for the very situation that the theatre was in at the time, the very complex moving part scenario that was around the whole of that province during that transitional period. I think we were able to put in some mechanisms, some processes that allowed us to at least have a central point and make some sense of what was going on from all these various pots of information that are out there, and provide a centralization and provide some clarity. And I think most rewardingly was eventually, with a little bit of imagination and adaptation, we were still able to conduct what we would term as a familiarity around our analytical approaches to generate products that were of value at the time to both the UNMIC police and KFOR who were operating in the space.
Yeah. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times now the fundamentals of intelligence analysis, and I just got to thinking that there may be a listener in there that's fairly new to the profession. So will you quickly go over some of the fundamentals that you're referring to?
Right. Well, I think we've got the intelligence cycle, which forms the core, really, of workflow plan for the whole process. But I think it goes broader than that. And I think, if anything, that time back in the 90s down in the Balkans kind of really, really brought into focus the personal traits and fundamentals that the individual has to have, as well as the technical prowess, as well as the skill sets and the structured analytical technique training and approaches. I think as important was the ability for people to be able to adaptability, and also be able to say, well, okay, we can't do it as we would normally do it. The situation, the environment doesn't allow, but how then do we adapt, pivot to make this work? And I think those things are maybe these days with automation and tools, fantastic tools and solutions, maybe that requirement to be more flexible in thought processes maybe not as apparent as it was back then. But one of the things reverting back to your previous question, Jason, which was what was it achieved? The personal development, I believe that the analysts that went out and were involved in that got, and their broadening of their approach was really clear to me as the manager on how they really expanded their thought processes and their almost approach to analysis. And that was borne out when everybody returned back to the regular, back from the secondment to their regular organizations. I saw a number of them really flourish, and I truly believe that a large part of that was their not necessarily their specific analytical skills, but their traits and their fundamentals as an analyst, to have that broader perspective and have that thought processes. We've always advocated, right, Jason, that analysis is fundamentally thought processes. All right, we use a number of structured techniques, obviously, to enable that, but the bottom line is it's the thought processes. It's that creative, critical thinking, all bound together by logic, is what really sets the analysts apart, and what their real value is coming to the table, looking at all those aspects. And I think those kind of challenging environments we talk about, some of those key traits about having that flexibility, adaptability, and also their open-mindedness to be able to change or approach things in a different manner, all aiming for the same end result. I think it's really enlightening. I think it's really broadening and adds a lot to the skill set and tradecraft of the analysts if they can do that. So it's about personal traits as much as it is about technical capability.
All right. And then, so you finish up in 2001, and then you go on, still with the UN, to spearhead the evaluation study for Southeast Europe.
Right. So as a result of everything that was happening in that region, Southeast Europe, including the Balkans and other countries, the UNDP, Development Programme, they were looking at trying to gauge and launch a project that would encourage the use of criminal intelligence analysis across the region, regional share of information. Again, the same philosophy that I mentioned earlier, that criminality was cross-border, was regional rather than specific to any one country or territory. Obviously, cross-border smuggling post sort of conflicts down there in the late 90s, a lot of transitional aspects of people being displaced, but also the opportunity for organized crime to kind of spread its networks beyond its own borders. So that became apparent that there was a real importance required to try and tackle regional organized crimes transnationally in the region. So it was really to go out and gauge what levels of competency and capability those various countries engaged in the project would have, with a view that the UN would put a project together to try and promote, uplift and capacity build that regional networking, sharing of international best practice from a criminal intelligence perspective. And obviously, background being NCIS, which was really at the forerunner in Europe of that kind of capability, I was commandeered back into the UN to go and do the feasibility study in each of those countries. That led to some very interesting findings, really, and lessons well learned about how people operate slightly differently. I think the key objective was, I think 9 countries were involved in that project. It was basically to see where they all were, and respectfully, they were all in different levels of development capacity and resource. So scalability for the project became all important. It's very difficult to put a blanket project across such a wide region until you get everything leveled up to at least a baseline standard, so that then you can start to introduce more holistic kind of project components. So it was a case of going and evaluating who needed what at that stage to get everybody to the same baseline level, so that there could be those shared capabilities going forward, and understanding of the whole ethos of intelligence-led approach.
Yeah, and that's where my head was going too when I see that it's 9 different countries that you're trying to bring to the same level. That obviously some countries are going to need more attention than others.
Absolutely, and that was exactly the case. And of course, you're operating in different legal jurisdictions too, which brings its challenges. Yeah, so there are elements that become restricted. There are different law enforcement structures in each of those countries. There are different policing. But one of the key elements that we did on the team that did the evaluation was, the first thing, again, back to fundamentals from the analysis point of view, was whilst a lot of people at senior level wanted all the sort of the modern day technologies, the first question that we were asking is, what is your mechanism for centralizing your information? Which sounds very, very sort of basic and boring, but it's a fundamental question, because if everybody is operating autonomously in a country, at local level, and there's no centralization of that data, any analyst would tell you that makes your job very, very hard, again, to get all the information accessible that you need to do your job.
It does seem, though, that your message through this whole process of both the Kosovo and now these 9 countries is the fundamentals of intelligence can be applied to very different situations.
They can, absolutely. What you have to have is a level of flexibility to understand and recognize where the differences and the localized adaptations need to be made in order to make it work. To use an old adage again, there's no one size fits all solution, and we're very conscious of that. And my work internationally over the last 25 odd years is that you cannot just pick up and transfer from one jurisdiction to another. You can go with the principles and the philosophies, but you've got to be open-minded, and you've got to make it work in that local environment. You cannot just overlay what works in, say, the UK or North America and overlay it in another jurisdiction, because simply it would be impractical, and you have to make those allowances and make those adaptations to make the model work. So we're very keen, wherever we talk and we reach, we make a model, and we say, well, this model can work, but it's up to you at a local level to see how you need to adapt it to make the core principles work. And you have to have that level of flexibility in order for these things to become practically.
Yeah. Now, before we move on, I'm curious, just personally, of these 9 countries, and then you got Kosovo. Is there one particular country that's your favorite, or did you one that's particular? You just the environment, the nature of whatever you were able to experience is better than the rest?
I have to be careful, because I've got a lot of enduring friendships in most of those, and I keep picking them up. What I will say is they were all very unique, and what I will say as well is that everybody that we dealt with were super enthusiastic and super keen, very open and willing to adopt and try and adopt the processes. And we couldn't have wished for better insights from all the various different ministers and ministries that we dealt with, and the law enforcement entities. They were excellent in embracing the concept and trying to achieve, which is commendable, considering what the region had been through. Obviously, you imagine there was a certain reluctance around the sharing. But that's not unique to that region. I've encountered that probably everywhere I go, and I include my own country. It's always difficult to break those barriers down. And I always stress to analysts when we go to any international conferences or we deliver training, that don't think that this is unique to you, this challenge that you sometimes have with people sharing or opening up or being accepting of analysis. That is a global phenomenon. It's better in some places than others, but it's certainly not. There's no utopia for that at the moment. So don't feel isolated as an analyst anywhere in the world if you're encountering some of these challenges that I alluded to today, because they're not unique to your jurisdiction, although sometimes it may feel like that.
Well, I don't want you to create enemies this late in the game, so I understand.
Oh, no, they were great. But I mean, I think the Kosovo experience was a very big eye-opener, because we were going into an environment and we were given the mandate to actually set something up from scratch. And this is something I'm also really, really passionate about in the intelligence analysis world, is that we're all aware of all the various training that's available out there, which is great and absolutely crucial. But as I always say to managers, seniors in the different jurisdictions, training is great. You must create the environment for your analysts to be able to operate. I think sometimes that is an overlooked component. I think people like to send people on courses, say, oh yeah, they're trained this, that, and this, they've done this. But unless you allow them to use those skills in their day-to-day work environment, the analyst value is diluted. 2 components: you must create the environment. And the other one that I'm big on is making sure that management understand the role of the analyst. That is another huge one that we've done over the years, particularly in enforcement, because it's changing now as analysts move up and the analysts are recognised as having their own career structure within agencies and organisations. But previously, the tendency was that management, particularly law enforcement, would have analysts within their auspice or within their management structure. but didn't really fully understand what the analyst role was or what the analyst could do for them. So that ultimately led to either analysts being misused, underused, or maybe not used at all in the role that they were designed. So we spent a lot of time as well creating workshops specifically people and senior management to understand the role of analysts. We've even put some managers on analytical training, and they'll never actually be practicing analysts themselves. But their ability to understand what their analysts can and should be doing for them has been a great way forward in moving not only the value of the analysts forward, but also making sure that management understand and utilize them in the most efficient and effective way.
That is crucial, especially since they're the ones going to be receiving the products and instructing the analysts. To have a standard, to have a general understanding of what an analyst does is key.
Correct. And it's a message that we hear time and time again from all around the world is, yeah, it's great. I love analysis, but I'm not really sure my management understand what it is I can be and should be doing for them.
Hi, this is Steve French, and I have a message to you about language. Language is really important when you're doing your job. For instance, it isn't a zucchini, it's a courgette. It isn't a lobby, it's a foyer. It isn't Z, it's Z. Buses go on routes, not routes, and it is never, ever made out of aluminum.
Hi, this is Sheila Dorn. Do you want to build your credibility with field personnel, with police officers on the street? Get a candy dish, put it on your desk, and fill it with good candy. That's your opportunity to talk with people and engage. You can send out 1 million emails. People might know your name, but they don't really know you until you talk to them face to face. And that candy dish is an opportunity to talk with people and really get to know them.
Hello, this is Brian Gray, and my advice for analysts is don't settle for mediocrity. If you want to be happy in this career, long term, you can't be a minimalist. Just don't do what you're asked for. Do what you know is right. And don't ever, ever substitute quantity for quality. And if you haven't found a way to put design to work for you, you're not doing your best work.
All right. Well, now let's get back to 2008 then. We're going to skip around here a little bit. And so now you are a senior international advisor for the Jamaican government, still focusing on organized crime. Give me the highlights of your time here.
Well, it was almost reload, repeat, because it was, again, trying to capacity build and assist around international best practice for the development of analysis in support of security and law enforcement in not only Jamaica, but the wider Caribbean as well. That uniformed approach and making sure that analysts and intelligence-led policing, which was a concept that was already in the air, if you like, but it was really to provide some of that mentorship, background advice, training. And again, one of the key things is creating the environment. I can't overstate the importance of that. So again, not just the theory part, but actually producing an analyst-specific environment in which to operate, and all the things that requires, particularly in this modern age, setting up. One of the things that I get asked quite often is, it's great having analysts, but how do you set that up? What does it look like? Do you add them onto teams? Do you have a standalone component? Do you have specialists with it? So again, that structuring of an analysis setup is really fundamental, alongside the training and the competency of the individual. So we look to set up a whole raft of an analyst cadre, taking young, very bright graduates and immersing them into the analytical environment. And as that's evolved, as that capacity is built into really, really quite a strong capability in Jamaica, and the analysts at the major organised crime anti-corruption agency have been heralded as being sort of the example, really, of how analysts can operate. And that's on their hard work. That's got nothing to do with me. They've applied this tradecraft and followed the international best practices, heavily involved with IALEIA, to the point where actually last year at the conference, the IALEIA conference in Vancouver, the major organised and anti-corruption agency of Jamaica was actually awarded the President's Award for 2025, which was testament to their commitment and importantly, again, the leadership understanding and the leadership support of the work of the analyst, because unless you have that top end support and real belief in what the analyst is trying to do, it is very, very difficult. So the major organized crime and anti-corruption agency had its 10-year anniversary, and that 10 years has always been the leadership there have been very, very pro analysts and have really pushed it at the forefront, which is testimony to them and testimony to the level of success that they've been achieving. My time there is probably nearing the end now, notwithstanding that I'm due to retire very shortly. But no, it's a very humbling and very proud perspective I have when I stand back and I watch these. I've seen some of them from their first day develop into really high caliber international standard analysts. A lot of them are out there teaching now. A lot of them are also accredited IALEIA instructors for the FIAT class. And I can't praise them high enough for their capabilities that they've developed through their hard work and application. It's been really heartwarming for me.
Nice. So you're in the advisor role, as you just described, and you're dealing with a lot of framework. I guess where were some of the frustrations that you had, or maybe there was pushback on what you were trying to set up? Talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that you've had as being in this advisory role.
Well, I don't. It's going to sound really gay. There's always some frustration, but I have to say, because of what I mentioned earlier about the unwavering support at senior level for this to work, there have been very, very few frustrations in it, really. It's been a slow process because these things aren't built overnight. I don't think that's a frustration. So I don't think there's been anything that has really been what I would call a frustration. No different to any other environment which I've worked in, including the UK, which is sometimes maybe some of the older guard within the environment are less accepting of analysis. But I think that's a generational thing. I think that's moved on massively, certainly in the UK, and I know it's moved on elsewhere too. But I don't think there's any way to circumvent that. You're never going to have everybody be believers from the get-go, maybe even ever. But I think that's a changing attitude now. And one of the key things I think that we've done is we've made sure we've adapted with the changing environment, because it has changed even in my time, even in the Caribbean. The technology explosion, if I can call it that, has really changed everything. And I think the key thing is you have to move with those. You must move with those times. You have to pivot to the changing environment to which the analyst is now working. And I think we've done that very well. We're embracing in technology as well. So I think that I wouldn't say there's been any real major frustration. I think what there is a completely evolving and fluid situation, probably more than ever in our realm. For instance, I'll give you an example. One of the things we're also overlaying in the approach that we go down now is maybe the type of individual that you're recruiting as an analyst has shifted slightly from our traditional thinking, if you may, if for want of a better word. Now you need to definitely be more tech savvy. You need to understand the nuances of some of this fast moving technology and data out there, because most of the time these days, information you're getting, it's been harnessed from those very sources. And so perhaps a more of a tech leaning is important, maybe compared to where it was 20 years ago. And I think some of the areas that we look at as well is taking people who already have a specialist background in some of these areas that we have an interest in, such as the tech side, the cyber world, or even the financial aspect and the technical advancements even within the financial sector, and then overlaying those experts with analytical skills. Whereas maybe in the past, it's been a case of getting an analyst, get your analysts in, get them recruited, get them trained up, and then get them to do their research on specialisms and knowledge areas, which we still do. But what we're doing is we're marrying those into teams with experts who are coming from those specialist fields, who are then adopting and having the analytical tradecraft overlaid. And that really gives you a real fusion of good expertise from both sides of the approach.
Let's keep on the technology topic.
Yeah.
I think the struggle that I've heard from a lot of guests when it comes to technology is there's obviously a vast amount of data, and there's limited amount of time for the analyst.
Yeah.
And so this idea of the decision making of the analyst on
Yeah.
what they're going to get best return on investment for their time, right? There is a lot of different data sets that they could comb through,
Yeah.
but just the ability to think and make the best decision is really key, and is something that can be challenging to train.
It can. And one of the biggest challenges that I've got, I mean, I find, is making sure that the absolute necessity for effective integrated technology outputs doesn't cloud or diminish the human judgment component of analysis. I think that is a real challenge. You've almost got to have, as I would frame it, sort of human stroke machine learning. I think there's a real danger that that rigorous critical thinking that we're all used to as analysts, and the cognitive bias reduction, etc., gets diluted through technological tools and AI models. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm anti any of that. I'm not. I'm very pro it, but I think you have to keep it in a balanced format so that you are ensured that your critical thinking and the decision making and the final evaluation, assessment, and interpretation of the data is there's a human in the loop. And I think that's really important. And I can see that it's really easy now for people to become over reliant on tech driven outcomes rather than applying some of that traditional analytical thinking, which I think we all agree is the key component of an analyst, is thinking. So it's teaching those analysts to use the technology as an aid, not as a replacement, and make sure that they maintain and retain that responsibility for final judgment, and it should remain with the analyst. So I think it's a two-way street. I think the two have to work in tandem, but I would just caution against, and I do caution against, over-reliance on technology to come up with a solution.
Yeah. Well, it's easy, right? You're just looking at the data. This is what the data is saying. And I think a lot of it too is you get an assignment, they're asking for something, you supply data, and that's about it. They didn't ask for suggestions or recommendations. You just gave them what they asked for.
That's right, and you're right. It's an easy option, but it's absolutely crucial that the analysts understand when to trust or challenge, and then supplement the automated findings with their independent analysis. You rightly say there, Jason, there is a tendency, and I've seen it a lot all over, where the analysts become very, very good at going out and scooping and even tracing down and condensing data, but then the key component is you're leaving your recipient to do the analysis. I'm saying regularly to people in different auspices, so what? This is great. This is a great piece of research. It's all there, but so what? Those recommendations and conclusions, your interpretation is absolutely fundamental. And I know those tend to come towards the end of people's final analysis reports, but I see a lot of analysis that stops short of making those interpretations, those recommendations, and those conclusions. So collating all the data into a very well formatted is very, very impressive, but that's only the halfway house for me of the real value of analysis. Otherwise, as I say, you're leaving your customer to do the analysis and come to their conclusions.
Collate was the word. You just said it. Collate was the word that I was trying to find. I knew it wasn't collaborate. It was collate, and that's what I was looking for, because that's obviously something. I mean, when you're dealing with multiple data sources other than data, that collate piece is important. I think now it's kind of overlooked because you're dealing with a lot of data, and that's you don't get into that as much.
And what I'll add to that, Jason, is not just the collation, but the evaluation of that data, how corroborating information. I say to this that speak to me about AI, I said, that's great. AI is great. You use it like you would an intern. Bring it all together, but you've still got to check what it is. And evaluation. And in this day and age of disinformation and AI generated, trying to evaluate both source and validity is really challenging. I won't lie, it's real challenging for the analysts, but it is an important factor that they mustn't overlook and take everything that they get in as gospel. I'm not saying that they do that, but there's a danger that there's an over-reliance on what gets generated rather than go back. You use it as your first point, but then in old money, go back and seek collaboration or go and see if you can corroborate that information from. And I know it's even harder these days to find independent sources, because what's an independent source these days? Because interconnectivity, et cetera, very difficult to know the origins, but you must always try and find the origins of the information. Harder and harder. So I'm not saying there's an easy solution, but I think it's important that analysts actually recognize it and then incorporate their professions and say, okay, this looks good. Let's see if I can verify this. And that's where you start. Again, the generation of automated collation, it starts to reduce that whole capability of key assumption testing, all the things that we need to do, because it will be so easy again to come up with a inaccurate analysis, which could not be as valid and lead to, poor decision making because of the validity.
Yeah. Well, I feel that with technology, with access to certain systems and resources, I feel the analyst gets pigeonholed in a way, and then they have a niche aspect of the process, and then they don't have a good general understanding of everything else beyond the data. So it's really difficult for them to come up with suggestions and recommendations when they're only able to evaluate maybe data, or they're just dealing with such a small sliver of the pie that that's a real struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. More and more people now are focusing on open source research, and you don't want your analyst pigeonholed, as you rightly say, as to be in open source research. So go and see what you can find out there, come back with it in a nice, succinct report, because you've got to merge that, as I say, with your other analysis, with your human analysis as well, whether that be additional information that's uniquely gathered through whatever mechanism you have for collecting or whatever. But you're right, there is a danger that OSINT becomes the king, and we all know about how easy that is. And again, back to my point about evaluation, how do you properly evaluate that dearth of information that's readily available out there open source?
Yeah, and I think this, to counter this goes back to the importance of what you talked about before, about ensuring managers and executives understand analysis, because analysts have to be able to reach a long ways beyond data so they can get that understanding. So they have to be part of meetings, they have to be part of discussions, they have to get access to reports, they have to be able to ask questions and be able to apply what they're seeing from the data to other aspects of the investigation or project.
That's right, because again, the danger is the bias comes from open source, even if it's subconsciously. So yes, they have to use all those. They have to come with that unique analytical thought processes, testing themselves, and not become over reliant on what they see in front of them. And it is difficult because, as you rightly say, people want things quickly. And you'll even have people come and say, "Oh, I found this when I was doing some internal research." So the capability and ability for people who are non-analysts to go and try and access information and come with an idea is there that wasn't there before. So again, you're absolutely right that all those different nuances that are unique to the analyst knowledge, through the meetings, through the debriefings, through the updates from speaking to people there, from understanding what the need is again. And this is why the first stage of that intelligence cycle is so important. It is understanding what the need is. That we almost have a terms of reference now, so that people aren't preconceived about what they expect to get from the analyst, which can be a challenge. This is what we're going to look to do, and this is how we're going to deliver it. But yes, giving them that unique autonomy to be able to do their own analytical aspects and incorporating that with tech generated information and process data is fine, but it still has to remain that uniqueness with the analysts making the final judgment and the final decision making around their conclusions and recommendations.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to IALEIA then. As mentioned in your intro, you are currently vice president. You're a FIAT instructor. You were awarded the President's Award in 2023. You were the chapter director of the international board from 2019 to 2023. I think that's actually where we first crossed paths as I was developing the 40th anniversary series for IALEIA. I think that's where you and I first crossed paths.
Yeah,
And so
in Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you obviously have a long history there. So I just wanted to first thank you for all that you have done for the association and just give you a time to reflect on the association and what you were able to accomplish.
Yeah, well, as IALEIA has been around over 40 years now as an association for analysts, and it stands for all the principles really that we've mentioned throughout this session, Jason, where we're talking about advocacy, training, professionalism within the analytical environment for those people working in it, striving for it to be continually recognized as a specialism that it is, the importance that it has, the role it has to play, and also providing that umbrella, if you like, for those people, analysts all over the world, who some in big departments, some in smaller departments, so they don't feel isolated. And you would have experienced multiple times our annual training event and the energy within that when you get analysts from all over the world coming together for that week. It's really quite inspiring, and sharing their stories and experiences, which allows them to realize that they're not alone. They do have the same challenges. They do have the same aspects. So a very invigorating week, but the association has always set its ethical and professional standards very highly. It's given it a roadmap for analysts, a focal point to be part of an association. Those foundational training courses that you alluded to earlier, very important piece of what IALEIA does. And then also our international certification program as well, which is a really important aspect of what we do, and is being more and more utilized throughout, sort of particularly internationally now as well. Really important for analysts in jurisdictions where maybe the whole use of analysts in law enforcement is a newer concept, and they may be looking to use the work that they do supporting investigations by actually testifying in court. Well, if you're certified by IALEIA, that question may well come around credibility of your evidence giving. What better way to do it than to say that you're internationally recognized and certified by the International Association of Law Enforcement Intelligence Analysts? So we provide that for our members. Our membership is now globally over 4,000. Tremendous people over the years that I both met and worked with. I can't speak highly about them. All volunteers, all professionals in the profession. And I think that is where our training really comes to the fore, because whilst all the people that are instructors are tremendous instructors in their own right, they're also been there, done it, and have the experience of practically doing the work too. And I think that is really what sets our training apart maybe than some others offered out there. So a great organization to be part of, a lot of work in the background, supported by a lot of other aspects. And we always thank you for your input and interest, Jason, through LEAP.
Thank you.
It's important to us, and we're always striving to do things better. We got a few things coming up in the future that we're looking forward to under this board term up to 2027, including a membership survey, where we really want to get into what the analysts on the ground want, because we're here to serve our members. The association is a member-driven organization, and we want to make sure as an international board that we can do all that we can to cater for the needs of the analysts, because as we said, it's a changing environment out there. We're broadening our scope as well, because there are a lot of other sectors now that are involved in the enforcement and the security aspects of what we do analytically, particularly with the emergence or continued emergence of technology. So we recognize that, and we're looking to diversify and broaden our offerings going forward, both from a training perspective and also deliverable to our members. So that training survey, I think we're scheduling to try and get that out early part of 2026, in time that we can get it back for before we have our annual training event next year in Orlando, Florida. So we're very keen that we get that feedback, so that will help drive, steer, and shape and reshape our strategic plan as we look to take IALEIA forward into its next 40 years.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of the conference, there is a call for presenters going on at the moment. So if
Yeah,
you are interested in presenting at the conference in Orlando, I think you have until November 21st to submit
that,
your
that's
proposal.
right. Yeah, you can submit your proposal in. Obviously, our conference success we have partnership, of course, with LEIU. And so that we were looking for, again, the wide ranging and diverse aspects of our speakers to make it a really, really exciting and thought provoking week. As you know, we never call it a conference, we always call it a training event. There's a reason for that because we want people to go away from that with something that they can practically take back to their environments and apply, stimulate their thoughts, stimulate the motivation, and give themselves some practical aspects. And again, we'll be offering the certificate tracks through the different components within the training week. We're delighted to revisit Orlando. We had a very successful conference there, I think probably about 5 or 6 years ago now.
Hmm.
Exact date. Tremendous venue, super. It's set up perfectly for what we do for all our breakout sessions and training components that we'll have. And we're confident, again, we'll have an absolute wealth of submissions for speakers. The challenge becomes how do you pick what you do and what you don't do, because it's
Yeah.
both boards confer. We look at that and we look to make sure that we give a bigger spread and appeal to all aspects of the analytical trade graph, not just for those experienced analysts, for those brand new to it as well. So a good mixture of everything we stand for and really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and April in Orlando, that's a good time to be there before it gets too hot and not dealing with the hurricane season. So that's a good time.
Yes, yes. The last time we were there, it was tremendously successful. So we're hoping for a repeat.
All right, Phil. All right, let's talk about advice. What advice do you have for our listeners? Maybe those that are trying to get in the field, maybe new analysts, experienced analysts. What advice do you have for our folks?
Okay. Well, as I say, open-mindedness and technological awareness is really important in this day and age. But I would say if you're coming new into it, and we recognize there are a lot of people coming new into it, and through IALEIA, we do try and sort of embrace those people who are either looking to come into the field or are relatively new. And we also recognize that sometimes this isn't always the first stop on their career path. So we recognize that people come into the analytical world at different stages of their work life. So that was one of the foundations for forming the Emerging Professionals Group. It isn't designed for young people necessarily. It's designed for people who are new within the first 5 years of working in analysis. So it encapsulates all age groups as well. So for anybody out there who's thinking about it or is coming into the analytical world, maybe later on in life, getting involved with the Emerging Professional Group, they're really good. But if I was to say over the time, the constants that I would say are benchmarks for analysts coming into the field, you need to stay organized and disciplined. And that comes back to, again, what we were talking about. The mass of data out there means you've really got to be organized. You've got to have a structure to your working day, week, month, year almost, because of just the masses of data. And so you have to be organized. And then you also have to be disciplined too. You have to stick to your principles too, as far as when you come to your insights, your recommendations, things like that. Do not be swayed or try not to be swayed by opinions. Very difficult. You have to be a bit brave if you're an analyst. Sometimes, senior individuals will have their own ideas of what the product should say, do, or look like. And you have to stick to your guns and make sure that your findings are data driven. May not always be. And as an analyst, people are always surprised about what they find themselves. So you've got to have that discipline. You've got to be a very effective communicator today. Again, particularly in the technological era we're in, remember that the people that you are producing for may not be as technically astute as you. Particularly, and that isn't a throw on them, specialists for specialists, but don't get too caught up with not using layman's terms. Keep it relatively simple and understanding, particularly when it comes to technical, and maintain that critical thinking component. Really important. As I say, we really push the fact that thinking is the real driver between good analysis. The critical thinking, the creative thinking, all bound together by logic. It's really important. And of course, with the changing world that we're in, the continuous learning piece, so crucial to what you need to do. So I would say make sure you keep focused on the big picture too. Whatever you're working on, make sure you realize how it fits into the bigger picture, And as I said, I would take time as well to look at all the aspects that lead to analysis, all those pieces within the intelligence cycle. Take time to go and understand, learn in depth how those mechanics work for whatever jurisdiction or organization you work in, because by understanding the other cogs in the wheel, you'll understand how to produce better your analysis. That's what I'd say.
Nice. Very good. All right. So as you mentioned, you're looking to retire soon, maybe this spring. Do you have any post-work retirement plans?
I have a few things. I have a few things in the fire. None of them firmed up yet. I'm looking forward to be able to dedicate a little bit more time to the IALEIA piece. Extend my mentoring role, really. A little bit of consultancy here and there where needed, if needed. And really just spend the remaining time I get before I actually finish trying to, and I've said it to the people around me who I work with, utilize me as much as you want between now and then. I'm very keen to try and give back as much as I can to the profession that has been really so good to me over, as I say, 40 years. I've thoroughly enjoyed most of it. No, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've been very fortunate. I've had some tremendous experience. I feel very privileged to have worked in the environments I've worked with. I'm in awe of the people that I've worked with, and to see the fruits of their belief and taking it on to the next level beyond me and the next generation is where I get my levels of satisfaction from. So I'm still going to be around the community for sure. I am certainly not putting my feet up and disappearing off. I have had a few phone calls already, but as again, I was certainly, obviously, I'm scheduled to remain on the IALEIA board as vice president till 2027 when this particular term comes. So I will continue my work and capacity there. And if anybody's out there who wants to reach out to me for any advice, I'm here to help. And that's really where I get my motivation from these days. It's about giving back and trying to, if I can help, I will. Anybody, regardless of where they are, what level they're at, I'm always open to chat. I'm a lifetime enthusiast for this, as you may have already gathered, and my appetite for it remains, but it's time I need to start to dial back a bit. I'm not getting any younger.
Well, definitely appreciate your contributions and perspective. I do have a task for you, though, that you don't have to wait till retirement on. I need your help to get the president, David McLaughlin, on my show, because he has been very slippery in my attempts to get him on this program.
Well, what I will say about David is he's tremendously busy. He has been involved in an unbelievable amount of work since he became president. I'm sure that'll come, and I think he would be excellent on it, and it would be, and he would look forward to it. I guess you're in line, and it's a fairly long line, Jason, but I will do what I can to move you up the line. How's that?
All right. Appreciate you. All right. And for the listeners, we'll put links to additional information on all the topics that we talked about. A lot of the IALEIA information we'll put on there. We'll put a way to contact Phil should you have questions for him. All right, sure. Phil, our last segment to the show is Words to the World, and this is where you can promote any idea that you wish. What are your words to the world?
My words to the world. Well, they would be, to every analyst out there, stay true and strong to your beliefs. Do not waver in the face of adversity. Do not be overawed by the prospects of an increasingly challenging world. Greet those challenges head on with vigor and analytical rigor, and the world needs you as much as you need the world. So stay doing what you're doing, move with the times, develop the new requirements, and keep doing what you're doing, because I would suggest that analysts going forward now have never, ever been needed more than they're needed right now.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with, you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Phil. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Again, thank you, Jason, for your time, and thank you for your continued interest in all that we try and do in our profession. It really is appreciated.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.